Hi guys, I'm back again with the second part for the revision video. So with this, we'd be finishing up all of the topics that we had listed and we had four more to complete. So we had metals and nonmetals, terrestrial environments, water and aquatic environments, and we also have fossil fuels and alternative sources of energy. So without sticking, let's jump in. So metals and nonmetals. Just as the last video or the first part, we always start off each section with our definitions. We want to get that out of the way before we go forward. And before going forward, just like the last video, please ignore any background noises that you hear, right? All right, so let's go. So, what is a metal and a non metal? Well, metals are elements that can conduct both heat and electricity. So we know those to be conductors and they are malleable and ductile, while non-metals are elements that cannot conduct electricity nor heat. So we know those to be the insulators and they are not malleable or ductile. And we have them occurring both naturally and synthetically, or they are man made. So, naturally, we have examples like wood being non-metals or insulators, and man made, we have like the different types of plastics. So some properties of metals, they are strong and have high tensile strength. They are usually solids at room temperature except for mercury, and we should know how mercury works or be familiar with that from looking at the mercury thermometer. They are good conductors of heat and electricity. They can be beaten into sheets. They usually have very high melting and boiling points, and they are mostly gray except gray in color except for gold and copper. And what are some properties of non-metals? Well, they can be either solid, liquid, or gas. They come in different states. They are poor conductors of heat and electricity, with the exception of graphite. They are very brittle. They have low density. They have melting points that are generally very low compared to metals. And again, compared to metals, in terms of the color, they come in various different colors. So now with I guess the most confusing part of this whole topic is the reactivity series and how the chemical reactions with the metals, whether it be acids or alkali. So what exactly is the reactivity series? The reactivity series is a list of the metals showing us or helping us to predict how they would react with either nonmetals or reagents such as acids or alkali. And it's arranged from the most reactive, if we're going from the top, to the least reactive at the bottom. And usually, with any diagrams that we have, the arrow usually goes in this direction, right? So it goes from the least, I'll just put L, so from the least reactive to the most reactive we would find at the top. So we have the metals and three different conditions here, or three different situations we can put it in to see how they are going to react with that reagent. So we can heat it with oxygen or in the presence of oxygen. We can put it with water, either cold water or steam, to see how it's going to react, and with acid. So general rules are in the corner here to get the products of the reactions. So metals plus oxygen will give us metal oxide, and metal plus steam will give us metal oxide plus hydrogen in its gaseous form. So if we were to look at the table here, we have potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, aluminum, zinc, iron. We know that, and I just want to draw a reference here between iron and lead, we will find hydrogen, and you'll see why I made sure and put that there. Then we have lead, copper, silver, and gold. So how are they going to react? Remember, From the top, we have our most reactive metals. So we know that it's not going to take much for them to react, and the way that they are going to react is probably very violent or very vigorously compared to the reactions you'll get as you go closer to the bottom or the least reactive metals here. So, potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, aluminum, and zinc, when heated with oxygen, they react very violently by bursting into flames, and the oxide forms very vigorously. So, that would be the metal oxide. So, we'd get, like, for example, potassium oxide, sodium oxide, calcium oxide, magnesium oxide, etc. The iron is less reactive, but it still reacts and it glows, and the oxide forms very slowly. And lead and copper, the oxide forms without glowing or bursting into flames. So the oxide will form, but in a very mild way. And silver and gold does not react when heated with oxygen. So these two have no reaction. And as expected, they are at the bottom of the reactivity series or this list here. Now with water, remember, the higher we are, the more reactive we are. So it's not going to take as much for those metals to react. So these with water, potassium and sodium being at the top of the list, it produces hydrogen with cold water. So not much energy is needed here for that reaction. With cold water, they are going to produce the hydrogen. Whereas from calcium to iron, it needs steam. So it will not react with cold water, but it will react with steam to produce hydrogen. So we'll get, as we have here, we'll get the metal oxide and hydrogen in its gaseous form. And lead to gold, which is the four at the bottom of the list here, will get no reaction at all with water, whether cold or with steam. You'll get no reaction taking place. And lastly, with acids, again, the two at the top of the list react very violently. So there's a violent reaction with potassium and sodium with acids. Then from calcium to iron, the rate of reaction decreases as you go down the table. So from calcium to magnesium, aluminum, and zinc to iron, you'll see the reaction that is taking place is going to be more mild, or the reaction is going to decrease as it goes down, but you are going to see a reaction. Lead, you'll get a reaction, but a very slow one. And the last three, copper, silver, and gold, you get no reaction at all. So hold on to this idea here or this table, and we'll add more to it. So now, what are some products of the reactions? So only metals above the hydrogen, remember I put the hydrogen here between iron and lead. So only metals above hydrogen in the reactivity series will react with dilute acids. Now, the more reactive the metal, then the more vigorous the reaction is going to be. And the metals that are placed high on the reactivity series, such as the first two, potassium and sodium, are very dangerous and react explosively with acids. As we saw, they said in the table here, they react very violently with acids. So remember that first line, that it's dilute acid that those above the hydrogen will react with. So what's the general rule that we have? We'll get acid plus the metal gives us salt plus hydrogen in its gaseous form. And the salt that is formed depends on the acid that is being used. So whether it's sulfuric acid, nitric acid, hydrochloric acid, and of course the metal that is being used in this reaction. So for example, if we're using magnesium with sulfuric acid, or let's say magnesium with hydrochloric acid, this is what you will get. So the magnesium chloride will be your salt, and you'll get that hydrogen gas being given off. And remember, magnesium, zinc, and iron, they are all above hydrogen in this reactivity series. And we have a little reactivity series here as well, not showing all, but showing most of them, the reaction with water. So potassium, sodium, calcium. Potassium very violently or reacts violently. Sodium reacts quickly. Calcium reacts less strongly. But you get the reaction. And we have the reactions with acids as well. So it's the same takeaway from here. Potassium, sodium reacts with cold water. Calcium to iron reacts with steam. And under hydrogen, which is lead, copper, silver, and gold, you get no reaction with neither water nor steam. Now, do all metals react with acids to give that salt and hydrogen gas, or could we get a next gas? So the answer is no, right? The less reactive metals react with dilute or concentrated nitric acid, and a different gas is given off. So most of the examples that we would look at is like the reactions with hydrochloric acid, right? But the less or the least reactive metals will give that reaction with dilute or concentrated nitric acid, and it will give a different gas. So we wouldn't get the usual hydrogen. What we'll get instead is a bronc fumes or bronc gas being given off, which is nitrogen dioxide. So, for example, from the reactivity list, we know copper and silver is under hydrogen, right? It's at the bottom there where we don't really get any reactions taking place. But it will react with either dilute nitric acid or concentrated nitric acid. So, for example, copper will react with dilute nitric acid, and it's very important to remember which is going to react with dilute or concentrated acid, right? So copper will react with dilute nitric acid to give copper nitrate. This is going to be your salt, and the gas is not hydrogen gas. Remember, it is going to be nitrogen dioxide, which is bronc fumes. So that's what you'll get from it. And silver is going to react with concentrated nitric acid. So it needs something stronger to give a reaction. Because if we take a peek back here, you'll see no reaction, right? So this is for like hydrogen, where we'll get hydrogen in any case. So for example, using hydrochloric acid or sulfuric acid, right? But reacting to get these to react, we needed something stronger or we needed something different. But the copper being higher in the reactivity series than the silver will work with the dilute nitric acid. The silver will not work or react with the dilute acid. It needs something a bit stronger. So therefore you need to use the concentrated nitric acid. And what you'll get is silver nitrate and the same bronc fumes, which is the nitrogen dioxide. So this little experiment here, I believe you should have done this in school, or now with COVID and everything, things might have been different. So I would assume or hope that you did discuss this in school, or at least on your own while you were studying, right? So this is one of the experiments that could be done to see if you are going to get any reaction between a particular metal and an acid, right? And what gas is being produced. So you have your whole setup. You have the stand, you have the clamp, you have your test tube here with a cork, and the cork has a hole, right, where you see this glass base coming out. So that you have the delivery tube. So this is going to be a glass structure, and you are going to bubble this in soap solution, right? So the reaction that is going to take place, you have the metal, which is zinc granules. So you have some zinc shavings in there. you have dilute sulfuric acid. That's what you added to the tube. And you want to see if there's going to be a reaction there. So remember, zinc above hydrogen in the reactivity series, it is going to react with the dilute sulfuric acid. And what you are going to get, we are supposed to get the salt as well as the hydrogen gas being produced. So to make sure, because you'll notice the bubbles, so you know a reaction is taking place, but to make sure that there's hydrogen gas being produced, this is why you have the second setup here. So you have the soap solution where that gas is going to be bubbled through, and the bubbles are going to be filled with hydrogen gas, right? And you have the candle here, which is going to be lit. Now, the reaction that you're going to get on this end is a popping sound. That's what you should hear when the candle or the flame from the candle and the bubble comes into contact. So once that it bursts, the bursting of hydrogen gas will give a pop sound. And that's how you will identify that the gas being produced in this experiment is hydrogen. Now, that was acids. How do metals react with alkali material now? So, what metals react with alkali? So, we have aluminum, zinc, tin, which the symbol is SN. They react with sodium hydroxide solution to form salts and hydrogen gas. We have iron, which is Fe, Cu, which is copper, and Au, which is silver. They do not react with alkali solutions. So the general formula is the metal plus sodium hydroxide gives the salt and hydrogen gas. And an example of what we would get if you have sodium hydroxide and you want to see the reaction between that and zinc, the salt that you would get is sodium zincate plus hydrogen, and that will be hydrogen gas. So I hope that was simple enough or informative enough with the reactivity series there. Now we'll move on with the topic. So what is an alloy? An alloy is a metal made by combining two or more metallic elements. So we have two different metals that are good, but they are not great standing by themselves. Maybe they are weak, they would corrode easily, they break easily, and but what happens when we join them, we get this alloy, right? So it's not a pure metal that we're making because it's made of two or more different metals joined together. The purpose of joining it or creating that alloy is to get better properties from it. So we'll get things like a greater strength, we'll get greater resistance to corrosion, we'll get higher hardiness. It will be better for us or for whatever we want to use it for. So, an example, we have bronze, which is copper and tin, an alloy made of copper and tin, and brass, which is an alloy made of copper and zinc. Then we have electroplating. So, we should know about electroplating and like what they say, the gold plated chains and all of these like ornaments or house decorations that we have, right? Or jewelry. So, what is electroplating? It's the process of plating one metal onto another by a process called hydrolysis. So, that's what we're using. That's the reaction we're using to do this plating. What is it used for? Well, it's used to coat metals to protect from rusting or to give an expensive appearance. So, you have a gold plated chain, right? But the base of the chain or what the material the chain is made from is not gold, but it's just plated. So you have a thin layer of gold that was electroplated on the surface of the material. So an example, the iron bumper bars of vehicles are chrome plated. One, to protect it from rusting, and two, to give a nice shiny expensive look. And a next one, cans that store the food. So cans that we'll get in grocery stores with our beans and corned beef, all these different things in it, are made of iron and they are tin plated. The reason why they are tin plated is to protect them from rusting. Now, what does the process involve? So this here is a simple setup for electroplating. So we have the energy source, which is the power pack here where we have the battery. And you're seeing negative and positive, right? So remember, we're dealing with electrons here. We have positive and negative, and each is connected to a different part of the setup. So we have the anode and the cathode. The anode is made from the pure metal that you want to coat your object. So the anode is connected to the positive end here. So I'll put A by this one. So that's the anode. The next one connected to the negative is the cathode. And the cathode is the object to be electroplated. And the electrolyte, which is the aqueous solution, is a substance, or sorry, of a soluble salt of the pure metal at the anode. So you're seeing at the anode, we have a strip of tin metal, and the electrolyte, the liquid, is tin chloride solution. So we have tin in the solution. Now, what is happening when the energy is put on, or when the battery is on and the process starts, you'll have going from the positive to the negative. So from the anode to the cathode. So that's how tin is now going to start coating or being deposited on the strip of iron metal that we are tin plating, which is represented by this blue layer on the strip of iron metal at the cathode. So that's how the electroplating process takes place. It's going to move from the anode to the cathode, plating or coating whatever that strip of metal is there that we want it to be plated. And rusting, what is rusting? Rusting is a chemical reaction, it's an oxidation reaction between water, iron, and oxygen to form rust, which is hydrated iron 3 oxide. So, for rusting to take place, we must have oxygen present and we must have water, right? So, oxygen and water must be present for rusting to occur. And rusting, is a redox process and it occurs faster in salty water since the presence of sodium chloride speeds up the reaction. So remember, sodium chloride, that's salt, right? So one of the most frequent questions they would ask, or ways that they would state something for the exam, is maybe somebody is living by the beach and they notice that their windows are rusting very quickly. What are some conditions that could cause rusting, or what are some conditions that would be increasing the rate of rusting of the windows? And that would be presence of the sodium chloride in the air, right, from the sea. So the general or the word equation for the rusting is iron plus water and oxygen to give dehydrated iron 3 oxide, which is rust. And we have this little example here or diagram showing if you have water but you have no air, you see they close off or blocked off the air by placing oil on top of it, you'll get no reaction here. No rusting will take place. But as soon as air is present with water, you get the rusting taking place. And you're seeing the rust falling off here. Because the rust, it flakes off of the material. And that's how, for example, if you notice like someone's car or someone's roof has a hole, you'd notice the rust spots and there'd be holes, or you'd actually see little flakes coming off. So it doesn't just rust and stay on the spot. it flakes off, and that's where the problem comes in because it starts making holes. And when it's rusting, remember it's doing that by layers, right? So the first layer is rusted, it flakes off, exposing the layer under, and that continues happening until it rusts through the entire space there, creating that hole. So, what factors affect the rate of rusting? We have the level of moisture, temperature, seawater because of that salt, acidic gases, and also, of course, acid rain, which we know is very corrosive. Now, how do we prevent rusting? We can put grease on the surface of whatever metal, we can paint it, we can put oil or plastic on the surface. And we can also do a process called galvanizing, which is where the iron that we want to protect is coated with a layer of zinc because the zinc does not react with the oxygen in the air to form that rust. So it protects the layer of iron which is under it. Or I shouldn't say it doesn't react with the oxygen, but it does not flake off or it doesn't allow rusting because it's protecting the layer of iron under it. So the next topic that we have is terrestrial environments. So the first thing with terrestrial environments, we have to know about soil. So what is soil? Soil is a thin layer of the Earth's crust that is made of a mixture of eroded rock particles together with any organic matter. So organic matter is from plants or animals, which is the humus. If there's water as well as living organisms in the soil, right? So we know it could be micro or macro organisms. Then, what is weathering? Well, weathering is the process in which the rocks are broken up into smaller particles. And that's how we get the rocks or the eroded rock particles to be mixed in here to give minerals and all of that to nourish the soil. So we have three different types of weathering. We have physical, chemical, and biological. Physical weathering involves breaking rocks into smaller pieces without any changes in the chemical composition. So, for example, the action of water. So, the water continuously beating against the rocks will eventually cause it to break and it will chip off into smaller pieces, right? So, that's physical. Then we have chemical weathering, which involves the breaking up of rocks due to chemical reactions taking place. So, for example, the oxidation of minerals in the rocks with oxygen from the air. And the last one, biological weathering, this involves the action of micro as well as macroorganisms. So, for example, a plant that is growing, if the roots get in between some sort of crevice between the rocks and it starts expanding while it's growing, that's going to be breaking up the rocks or pushing it further apart. So, that's biological weathering. Then we have three types of soils and what are their properties. So we have sand, or three main types, I should say. So we have sandy soil, loam soil, and clay soil. Sandy soil, sand. So for example, think of beach soil, the sand on the beach, right? It's very acidic. It's low in nutrients. It's very light, so it will blow away very quickly if it's get dry, and it has a low water retention. So that means water will quickly seep through that sandy soil. It doesn't hold the water. Then we have loam soil, which is a combination of the different types of soil. So it's like a good combination between clay and sandy soil. And it's the best soil for growing most crops because it has a good water retention rate. So it doesn't lose the water too fast, but it also doesn't hold a lot of water, making the area very swampy or flooded. And it's very fertile, meaning that it's rich in nutrients and minerals that the plants would need to grow. And the pH is not too high or too low. And then we have clay soil, which is the opposite of sandy soil. So it's very high in nutrients. It's also very heavy. It's clay, as the name suggests, and it has a very high water retention rate. So it doesn't allow water to pass through very quickly. And therefore, this could cause a lot of problems when it comes to what kind or type of crops that we're growing in the area, as if it's an area that is easily flooded, then having clay soil that will keep the water there, usually flooding or drowning all of the plants that you would have. So, for example, if you have a field of lettuce on clay soil, that wouldn't be highly recommended, right? That especially in an area that isn't well drained. Um, then what is humus, or some people say humus, so whichever way you prefer to say it, right? It's a collective name for any organic matter in the soil that may come from dead and decaying animals or plants and even their excrement. So any feces or whatever animal droppings. This is collectively part of what makes up humus. And what does it do? It improves the soil texture and increases the water holding capacity, which while releasing nutrients as it decays. So it's like a slow fertilizer, or organic fertilizer in a sense, right? Because that's what it is, releasing nutrients slowly as it is being decomposed by the decomposers, which is the microorganisms in the soil. So, with the terrestrial environment, we have to know the different natural cycles. We have the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. The water cycle should be very simple to remember. This example is using the open water source as the ocean. So we have the evaporation of the water at the surface, right? They get energy, they break the bonds between them, and they are free now in their gaseous state. So we have evaporation taking place, and this gives the water vapor. Water vapor eventually condenses, or we have evaporation as well as transpiration from the trees, right? That transpirational pull releasing the water in its gaseous form. This also adds to the water vapor that is collectively in the air. This condenses and turns into clouds. The cooling process continues, and now the clouds are heavy because we have water droplets. This will eventually, quote unquote, burst, causing the precipitation, which is the falling of the water from the sky to the earth. And this could happen in different ways. So we know water, snow, hail, for example, right? When this falls to the earth, it can go two ways. It can either just run off on the surface and go back to any open sources, water sources, or percolation can take place where it will go underground, and this is where the plants will absorb it through their roots. And the transpiration could continue like that, and the water also eventually gets back to some sort of open area or open water source. For example, like what they have here, the ocean. The second one, the carbon cycle. We know that the intermediate in this cycle is the plants, because humans nor animals, we cannot take in carbon dioxide from the air. This is a waste product. We give off carbon dioxide. We need oxygen. So what is happening here? The carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is absorbed through the plants for their purpose of photosynthesis to make their own food. Then we have the food chain coming in here, because we can go two ways. So we look A first, this area. The food chain takes place. We have a herbivore or omnivore eating the plant, getting the carbon units from the plant, right? Um, Two things can happen at this point. When we breathe out, we give carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, and we know this is through the process of respiration, or from animals, plants, and decomposers, right? So respiration, making energy, giving off carbon dioxide as a waste. that goes back to the atmosphere, or when the animal dies or releases its excrements, we have the decaying of the organic matter by the decomposers. And the carbon in the dead and decaying matter is broken down by the decomposers and sent back into the atmosphere. So that's one route at which the carbon dioxide can go back to the atmosphere. The second route is through the burning of fossil fuels. So we have the middle point again, the plants take it in, but then the plants die and the process of fossilization takes place. So the fossilization of dead plants and animals occur in specific conditions. So this will be conditions like specific temperature as well as pressure. And we have the amount of time as well being taken. The carbon is stored in fossils or in fossil fuels such as coal and oil. And then when we, which is man, break this up or collect this coal and oil and we burn it, this carbon is released into the atmosphere through the process of combustion, which is the burning of the fossil fuels to get the relative components that we need, and that sends a large amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So you're saying the carbon dioxide cycle, it is natural, but man-made activities throw it off because it's not made to take in this much carbon dioxide at one point or carbon in other forms, right? And the last one, which is the nitrogen cycle, this one tends to be a bit confusing to students, but I hope that I could break it down as best for you. So we have atmospheric nitrogen in the air, right? And the bonds between the atmospheric nitrogen is very, very strong. So we cannot take nitrogen from the atmosphere, nor can plants just take nitrogen from the atmosphere. So we have two processes by which the nitrogen has to be fixed first before it can be incorporated. We have the nitrogen fixation by lightning, where during thunderstorms you have the lightning. Lightning is pure energy, and the energy between or the energy made from the lightning, that is enough to break the bonds between the nitrogen molecules or the nitrogen gas molecules. And when they are separated, they dissolve in the water with the rainwater and it falls to the earth. And then we have microorganisms waiting there to convert it into the form plants can take in. Or the second way, we have nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil. So there are some microorganisms that are able to take the nitrogen from the air and convert it into a form that plants can use. And these microorganisms can either be free living in the soil or we can find them in the nodules of leguminous plants, right, in the roots. So we know that that's a symbiotic relationship there. Both of them are benefiting from it, right? I hope you know which type of relationship is that. You can look back at your revision notes for that, right? And the same thing. So from both methods, the lightning or the bacteria that we can find freely in the soil or the nodules of the leguminous roots, it converts it to this phase here, which is NO3 minus, and that is nitrate ions. Now, nitrate ions is the form that the plants can absorb it or assimilate it, right? So that's the process. It's called assimilation, where the plants, through the roots, they can absorb these nitrate ions, um, and then this is used in the plant to make amino acids. And we know amino acids fuse or join together to form different proteins. So at this point, once it's in the plant, then we can get it to the animals. So herbivores or again omnivores eat plants, we get the nitrogen from that. right? Or we eat other animals, we also get the nitrogen from them, right? Because it has been passed on from the plant, and persons are able to use the ammonia to make their different types of um, proteins and whatever else they need to do with the amino acids in their bodies. Now, the process in which it is given back, because it's a cycle, through deamination. So I hope you could recall the excretion where you looked at the kidneys, and you also know what happens in the liver. All right, so deamination occurs in the liver, and this is where we have excess amino acids. So unlike glucose or fats, we cannot store that. So, for example, if we needed 20 units of amino acids and we had 25, we couldn't store that 5. So, in the liver, that extra amino acid is converted into ammonia first, which is toxic. So, it's almost immediately that ammonia is converted into urea, and we get rid of that urea through the kidneys, filtering it out, and we excrete that through our urine. So that is sent out, or the animal could die, right? And we have the decomposition of the plants or animals. So that the plant or animal proteins is broken down by the microorganisms, converted into ammonium ions, and then through the process of nitrification. So we have nitrifying bacteria here. This converts the ammonium ions, which has been broken down from the animal or plant remains or their excrements, into, or back into, I should say, the nitrate ions that can be absorbed by the plants. So, this in itself here is the cycle. We're getting it from the air to this point here, which is the main point, and then we're just cycling at this point here. But sometimes, under certain conditions, there are bacteria called denitrifying bacteria in the soil that can convert or will convert this useful nitrate ions into or back into atmospheric nitrogen, because they need the oxygen from that, right? And then you have to go over this whole cycle. So I hope that was simple enough. Next, we want to move on to weather fronts. So we have the different types of weather fronts. We have the symbols for it, and this table just made it very simple, stating how it's formed and the type of weather we could expect from it. Right. So this here is cold fronts, or representation for cold fronts. What is a cold front, or how is it formed? It's a fast-moving cool air mass when it overtakes a warm air mass, right? And the type of weather, clouds are formed. Um, if the warm air is humid, rain or snow may fall. You would have possible thunderstorms. Then you have the warm front. So a warm air mass overtakes a slow moving cold air mass. What type of weather would you expect? Scattered showers, light rain or snow, and may last several days. Then we have the stationary front. So the stationary is a mixture between the cold and warm front you're seeing here, right? The cold at the bottom, the warm to the top. So the stationary front, the cold air, sorry, what? The cold and warm air meet, but neither can move the other. So it's stationary, it's not moving. So it creates, as they put here, quote unquote, a standoff. And what type of weather would you expect from that? Rain, snow, clouds, or fog that may last for days. And then the last one, which is the occluded front, where you have both to the top now. This is a warm air mass, right? So a warm air mass is caught between two cooler air masses, and the warm air mass is pushed upwards. So what's the weather you'd expect from this? The temperature gets cooler and clouds and rain may form. So those are the four different types of weather fronts that you need to know. And you also need to know their symbols. So we're coming up to the end of this topic here. So hurricanes, how are they formed? Well, water vapor from the surface of the sea is carried into the sky by rising air, and when it cools, it condenses, turning into rain. Now, during this cooling process, energy is being released, and this energy is going to be used to power the hurricane. And as the air rises, more hot air or hot, moist air is drawn in to replace it, and this creates powerful winds. And this is how we get the creation of a hurricane. Now, what is the center of the hurricane called, or the calmest part? That is the eye, right? So, if you are asked what is the eye of the hurricane, it's the calmest region where the pressures remain low with no winds or clouds. Tidal waves. What is a tidal wave? It is a regularly reoccurring shallow water wave caused by effects of the gravitational interactions between the sun, the moon, and the earth on the ocean. And what are the different types that we have? We have high, low, spring, and neap tides. So high tides, it is based on the position of the moon, right? So we have where the moon is, we'll have high tides. So in this direction, this is where the high tides are going to be. And where the moon isn't in line with, this is going to be your low tides. But if the moon came to the top here, then this area as well as this area would now be your high tides, and these two will be your low tides. Volcanoes. What is a volcano? It's a hill or mountain which has a crater or vent through which lava, rock fragments, hot vapor, and gas are, if it's active, or have erupted from the Earth's crust. And what type of pollutions can we get from this? We can get air pollution, so like the dust and the various gases that are emitted. And we can also get like land pollution. So if the dust settles, the magma, which is really sort of lava, which will destroy anything within its path. So it will burn down trees, it will kill organisms, so anything that is there, any livestock, it will also destroy any houses or anything that is within its way, it will get rid of. And now to the last two. So I just want to get this video out in one piece. So if I seem to be rushing or making little mistakes along the way, please forgive me. I don't want to have to split it into two parts. So you are free to feel to take a break. You don't have to listen to me talking for this long period of time, right? So just pause it whenever you need a break and you can come back in, right? So we have the last two to do, which is the water and aquatic environment, and then we have fossil fuels and alternative sources of energy. So water and aquatic environment. What are the different types of water we have? We have fresh water and salt water. So fresh water would be like the rivers, ponds, the streams, and the salt water would be, of course, the ocean or seawater we're talking about. Now, depending on the type of water, we'll have different organisms living there, whether it be animals or plants, because they would be acquainted or they would be adapted to living under certain conditions. So, whether it be the pH, the salinity, the type of or microorganisms or organisms you'd find living there, or the nutrients that you'd find, this is all factors. So the abiotic factors would determine the biotic factors that you would find living in these different types of water. Now, why do we need water? Well, our body, if we're talking about humans, we're 70% or more with water, right? Our body is made up of a large portion of water. And as we'll know from looking at that topic of cells, all chemical reactions in the body need water or aqueous environment to take place. So it's to maintain chemical reactions in the body, to allow the mobility of materials, so nutrients and all of that, to allow materials to dissolve, and also for plants to maintain their turgidity, especially like grass plants that don't have um, a wooden trunk to keep them upright. Now, what are some uses of water? We use water for agriculture, for industry and commerce, for recreation, so like in pools and all of that. And most importantly, we use it for drinking and other household needs that we have, especially from that first part to of the revision to ensure that we maintain that proper hygiene, right? Now, water purification. So while I'm reading through this, you can follow along on the little diagram that there's at the bottom here, right? So what are some of these steps, or what are the steps involved in water purification? So the first thing we have, we're taking water from open sources. So we have or the dams, right? We're taking in the water, and first we have to screen it. So the screening, which is first step, this removes any large objects like twigs and branches. Then, after it has passed through that, the water is left to settle in a settling tank where all the small objects fall to the bottom. And something called alum is added to coat the impurity particles and make them fall. So it coats it, makes it heavier, and those impurities are going to fall and settle to the bottom of this settling tank. After this happens, the water is then filtered through a graded filter bed to allow the remaining solids and bacteria to be removed. So this is this part here, right? So you have aerobic bacteria remove organic waste and effluent. Sorry, from effluent, right? So that's the water here after the sludge or the material has been settled to the bottom. So the next part, now that all the debris, the dust, and most of the bacteria is removed, then you have chlorination and aeration to take place. Now at this stage, what happens? Chlorine gas is bubbled. So this is this point here in the diagram. The chlorine gas is bubbled through to kill any remaining microorganisms that could possibly be harmful to you. And the water is then aerated to remove the chlorine. So that has to happen. You don't want to keep that amount of chlorine in the water because it's not going to be a safe amount for you to drink or to consume. And finally, what is going to happen? The water is tested. So once the water is tested and it is deemed safe or it meets the safety standards, then that water is in last phase to be pumped to your domestic for your domestic use. So this will be the water that you will get through the pipelines. No, that is purification on a large scale. But on a small scale or in a lab, we can also purify our water for whatever reasons that we need to, right? So different methods, we have boiling, filtering, desalination, chlorination, and also adding alum, which we saw in the large scale. Adding the alum will coat any dust or any small particles, allowing them to settle because they are now heavy, right? So this diagram here shows distillation, which is a process by which we can get purified water. Now, distillation could be done in the lab, and we have the equipment set up here. So we have the clamp, we have the stand, we have a Bunsen burner, which will be our heat source. You have the boiling tube, and you have your flask, right? Your distillation flask. You have the thermometer because you want to check. Remember, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. So you want to make sure that it gets to that point. Once you see the water bubbling, you know that okay, it's boiling. And what is going to happen, remember, once it hits that mark, then you are going to get water vapor being created. and the water vapor is going to be rising, right? And it's going to go through this open tube here. Now, this open tube is connected to the condenser, right? And the condenser, you have the tube in the middle here, and around it, you have cold water being funneled in. So, cold water coming in and leaving on the next side. Now, why do we want the cold water to leave? Remember, the cold water, or the purpose of this phase here, is to reconvert that water in the gaseous state to its liquid state. So the water is going to be cooling this by taking away the heat. So we don't want to keep that heated water circulating because that's going to defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do. So that's why the water has to be funneled out. So while it's going through here, it's going to condense and water is going to fall or be collected in this flask here. So what you're going to have on this end is pure water because it's just the water vapor, which is pure water that has been funneled here and condensed. So any impurities will remain on this end. And what exactly is desalination? Well, you're in a Caribbean island, so you should know what desalination is or have heard about it, right? With desalination plants and all of these different things. So, what is it? Desalination is a process that takes away mineral components from saline water, and saline water, that's salt water, right? So, we can take water from the sea and cleanse it or purify it through this process of desalination to make the end product safe for us to consume. So all this talk about water, water is essential for life, right? You can survive limited amount of days without water. You can survive more days without food, right? Both of them very important for their specific reasons, but water is very, very important. So, what are some of the properties of water? Well, water is cohesive and adhesive, meaning that it can stick to each other as well as stick to the surface that it is going through. So, this is two of the properties that make water so great to work in the xylem system of plants to ensure that the transpirational pull takes place efficiently. It's a good solvent, so many molecules dissolve in water, so it's known as the universal solvent. And it has both hydrophobic and hydrophilic properties, or it works in both cases. Three, it has a lower density as a solid, as ice floats, as we see in our drinks. So we can put ice in a glass of water, it's going to float. Four, the high specific heat. So water stores heat. And five, the high heat of vaporization. And what this is all about is that it heats and cools very slowly. So it's not immediately as you add it to the heat, it will turn into a gas. It takes time. It has to go through a process. So how do gills work? The capillary system within the lamellae ensures that the blood flow is in the opposite direction to the flow of water. So we have this counter current system taking place here, unlike what we have going on in like mammals where we have our lungs or land creatures. So this diagram here shows us the fish. We have the gill system set in place here, and it's showing what happens. Now, what's the purpose of having this counter current system? The counter current system ensures the concentration gradient is maintained along the whole length of the capillary. So what the counter current system is, let's say the water is moving in this direction, the blood will be moving in that direction. And what it's going to do at every point is ensuring that you have that exchange taking place. So oxygen can come in to the blood and be moved immediately. So we're not keeping or we're ensuring that there is always a concentration gradient, and that way, most of the waste material, for example, the carbon dioxide, will be removed from the fish, and most of the water could be absorbed into the blood. So the water with the lowest oxygen concentration is found adjacent to the most deoxygenated blood. So we have the system here. The water comes in through the mouth of the fish and it goes through the system. Here you have the arch, the gill arch. You have your operculum, which is the gill cover on the outside of the fish here. And this is what is going on inside. So you have the rich oxygenated blood and the oxygen poor blood, and you have the water going through here. So the water flows between the lamellae, and the blood flow through the capillaries in the lamellae is also in this direction here, right? So counter current. Now, water pollution. We have different types of water pollution, and we also have different things that will cause it to occur. So, what is eutrophication? It is a phenomenon by which chemical runoff from the land, so for example, like fertilizers, or even if we throw sewage and all of these things into waterways, it can cause a large overblossom of algae on the surface of water bodies. So I'm sure all of you have noticed this phenomenon at some point, whether on a large scale or a small scale, or in person or on television or anything like that. You have the large overbloom of this organic matter. Now, the problem comes with that, yes, it's blocking the sunlight. It's also using up a lot of the oxygen and everything from the water, depriving the organisms that live in this space. And think about a closed environment, so like a pond, where the organisms can't move from the pond to go somewhere else or maybe lower downstream. Now, when the algae dies, then you have microorganisms that would come and feed on this. And this takes the oxygen from the water, adding carbon dioxide. It's throwing off the pH. It's taking the oxygen from the water that the organisms would have been using. And we also mentioned before, with the blocking of the sun and all of this, the plants would not be able to photosynthesize. So, what it's going to do is, in a sense, create a death zone there. The organisms would not be able to live. If they can move from the space, they will move. But if it's a closed environment, most likely this process of eutrophication is going to end up killing all of the organisms that live in said space. Now, what are some other examples of things that cause water pollution? We have the release of pesticides or runoff of the pesticides again. We have oil spillage, and as mentioned before, the release of sewage into open water sources. Then we have fishing. So any different types or different purposes of fishing. We have like hobby fishing, so you do it for fun. Commercial fishing, which is done on a large scale to supply food chains. And then we have fish farming. So fish farming is a way to sort of prevent the overkill or the overfishing that is done for commercial purposes, right? Because for commercial purposes, let's say type A is very popular or in high demand, then it's a large amount of that type of fish is going to be caught to be supplied to the different areas that want them or to meet the demands. And that is going to be interrupting or causing some sort of disruption to the natural food chains and food webs in that environment, which could lead to many different problems that may not affect us immediately, but eventually it will, right? So, fish farming is used to prevent the overfishing by breeding that particular type of fish that is always or in high demand to sway people from actually going out there in the sea and taking out large schools of this particular type of fish. Now, what are some fishing methods? We have many different types or different methods that can be used, some more effective than some based on what you want to use it for. So we have trolling, we have line fishing, hand line fishing, sonar fishing, and we have net fishing. I forget the N, sorry, the I, right? And last on this topic, we have scuba diving. So, what is scuba diving? It's a mode of underwater diving where the diver uses a self contained underwater breathing apparatus to breathe underwater, right? So, they have the tank has the oxygen that they need. Now, what are some hazards that are associated with scuba diving? So, yes, if you are interested in that sort of activity, um, scuba diving is really interesting, but there's a lot of precautions that come with it because this could be something that could cause permanent damage or, worst case, even death. So we have things like nitrogen narcosis can happen, and this occurs when the diver goes too deep and the nitrogen dissolves in the blood. Now, when this happens, this usually leaves the diver without any control. You start getting very nervous and disoriented. And if there's no one around to help or to assist, then this could cause the death of said diver. Then the eardrums can burst if you are descending or ascending too quickly because of the pressure. And because of the same high pressure, it can cause the rupturing of lungs. And lastly, fossil fuels and alternative sources of energy. So, what is a fossil fuel? It's a natural fuel created from plant and animal remains, which for many millions of years has been left or has been there under specific conditions which include specific temperatures as well as pressures, right? So it's there, trapped underneath all of this mud and away from any large source of water. And that creates that atmosphere there where instead of turning into a fossil, oil is formed. So you're seeing in this diagram here the many layers. So you have the sea where the water is, you have the rock bed, and under that you have the crude oil. So here is where the oil is, and this is the oil rig. So when with all of these oil companies like Exxon, etc., the what they are doing, they are digging, and they get this oil, which is very useful. Even though we're trying to, or most countries are now seeing all of the various pollutants or the negatives of using this and trying to move to cleaner oil sources. But it still doesn't remove the fact that oil is one of our largest reserves, and that falls into the non renewable energy. So, what is fractional distillation? Well, this crude oil that we get, we can't use it in its state like that, it's useless. So, to use it, it has chemical energy, right? Chemical potential energy. Remember that from the different types of energy from the previous video, right? So it is a process by which crude oil is separated into its different components based on their boiling points. So you have your column, your fractional column here, and based on the temperature you are going to get different components from this crude oil. So at the bottom will be your heaviest components, which will be like bitumen, which is used to pave roads and also on roofs. Then we go up a little further, we get diesels, so for cars, lorries, buses. Then we have kerosene for aircraft fuel. And at the top here, usually around 25 degrees Celsius is where we get gasoline for fuel for the cars, right? And at the very, very top, which is the lightest, we can get refinery gases, which is bottle gases that we use for cooking and all of that. Now, what are some environmental problems of burning fossil fuels? We come into two major problems here. We have global warming and we have acid rain. So you can pause at any point when all of the parts come up because we may be talking a little slower than what is actually showing. But global warming is something natural, right? Where the energy or the sunlight or the energy from the sun, which comes through space to the earth through radiation, this some of it is kept to keep the earth warm. Without this, it would be an ice age, right? So we have to keep the earth warm. So global warming, natural. But most of the heat or most of this radiation, sorry, is reflected back into space, right? That should naturally occur. But with all of the pollutants that we have in the environment now, the amount of greenhouse gases that it naturally is, that has been imbalanced. So now there's a higher amount of greenhouse gases. Therefore, this means that there's a higher amount of radiation that is going to be trapped. Wow, what a day to record. I hope the noise isn't bothering too much. But anyway, so most of the radiation is going to be kept um, on the Earth's surface. It's going to be trapped. And therefore, this is what is increasing or raising the temperature here on Earth, causing the melting of the polar ice caps, the increase in the sea levels, increase in temperature, of course, because we all can feel it, especially these days. It's really, really hot, right? The throwing off of weather patterns, all of these different things are a side effect of um, global warming, also the heating of the ocean, right? Which then leads to the bleaching of corals. So, all of these things, major problems have happened because of global warming. And then we have acid rain, which can be a result of the release of different gases or toxic gases emitted from either our exhausts from vehicles or from the extensive burning of fossil fuels. So these gases are released into the air where it mixes with the water vapor that is there. And then this is sent in or with clouds. Eventually, when the clouds become heavy with the droplets and the rain falls, whether liquid or we have snow, anything like that, it's that acid rain that is being produced. Acid rain is very, very detrimental to the environment. It can burn structures, so it can corrode statues, all of these things. It is very harmful to animals as it could kill them. It's acidifying waterways. It can burn trees, right? Cause the damage to forests by burning the leaves and the trees, acidifying the soil. A lot of organisms can lose their habitat, throw off food chains because organisms are migrating. All of these different things, all of them stemming because of human activities or too much of a particular type of activity. It's not giving the earth or the environment enough time to cleanse or put itself back in balance. Now, what are some alternative sources of energy? We can use biofuels, solar energy, wind energy, hydroelectric energy, or geothermal energy. And how do solar systems work, or how does solar energy work? Well, we have the solar panel. The solar panel has cells which are called photovoltaic cells, and these cells is used or are used to convert light directly into electricity, right? So these solar panels, if you have these solar batteries, they can be stored because at night solar energy cannot be made. The sun needs to be there, or you need to have direct sunlight for this energy to be trapped, right? And once these solar items are charged, then we can use it in the absence of light. So at night, we can use it once they are charged. Now, the heat energy from the sun is also absorbed by the solar panels, but it isn't converted into electricity. This is transferred by the process of conduction to water for solar water heaters. So we have this here, the solar collector, you have the heat transfer pump, you have your tanks with the water. So the blue representing the cold water, red hot water. So once the heat is inside here, we have convectional currents being created now, where the cold water will sink to the bottom. When the water becomes heated or it gains energy, they become lighter, less dense, they float or go to the top, and this hot water will then be funneled over into the water heater tank here. So this is going to only have hot water, and then we can use this hot water for whatever use we have. So if you want to have like heated pools, this is what they use. To get water for our showers, whether it's water for your pipes to wash your hands, if you like to wash your hands with warm water, all of these different things. These are ways we can use the hot water made from this system. So, with my many mistakes and funny pronunciation of some words there, or off, I should say, and the noise in the background, we are finally done. So this is all of the topics that were listed by CXE for you to know. Once again, the topics: health and sanitation, electricity and lighting, conservation of energy, metals and non-metals, terrestrial environments, water and aquatic environments, and fossil fuels and alternative sources of energy. So remember, this is just for paper two. For paper one, you need to know all because it's give or take. Anything can come on that paper, and usually paper one touches on everything, even if it's just one question from a section has to come, right? So please remember to learn everything for the paper one. Practice your multiple choice because you usually have a lot of repeated questions. So you don't want, this paper to come where everything is a repeat and you didn't pay attention to your past papers, right? You don't want to have that mistake there. So all in all, I do hope that these free sessions here will of some sort of help to you. And um, best of luck with your exams. Okay, take your time, make sure and read over everything, pay attention to the questions that are being asked. If you don't remember or you're frustrated about something, just leave it and go on to something else. You'll come back at the end to do it over. Always make sure that you have time to go back to questions or to just review anything that you probably wasn't too sure about for both paper one and paper two. Okay, so apart from this video, just look out for the second part of part two, which will be some questions based on the information from these four topics. All right. So once again, best of luck in your exams and thanks for staying straight to this point if you did. Hope you took some breaks in between because my voice could be really annoying at times. All right, so let me know in the comments if you enjoyed it, if it was useful or helpful, if you shared it with friends, and that's it. So bye.